The school bell's shrill cry pierced the afternoon air, and Marcus watched as children began spilling out of the building like marbles from a broken jar. His steel-gray eyes swept the crowd, searching for the familiar flash of auburn hair that matched her mother's, the only beautiful thing left from his previous life. Emma. Emma emerged from the side entrance, her small frame dwarfed by a backpack that seemed designed for someone twice her size. Even from 50 yards away, Marcus could see the careful way she moved, like someone trying not to disturb broken glass inside her chest. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with the clusters of children who laughed and shouted around her, their voices creating a symphony of normalcy that his daughter would never quite be able to join. Marcus killed the engine and swung his leg over the bike, his boots hitting the asphalt with purpose. Other parents gave him a wide berth, they always did. In a town where the biggest excitement usually involved high school football scores and county fair pig judging, a man like Marcus Donovan stood out like a wolf in a petting zoo. The leather jacket didn't help, nor did the visible scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from an IED blast in Kandahar that had taken 2 of his men and nearly taken his life. But Emma never flinched when she saw him. Her face lit up with the kind of pure joy that could make a man believe in redemption, and she ran toward him with the unsteady gait that was uniquely hers. When she crashed into his arms, he felt the familiar surge of protective fury that had kept him alive in dark places across the world. "Hey, Butterfly," he murmured into her hair, using the nickname that always made her smile. But today, the smile flickered and died before it could take hold. Her small hands gripped his jacket with desperate intensity, and he could feel the tremor running through her small body. Marcus knelt to her level, his calloused hands gentle on her shoulders. "How was school today?" Emma's eyes, the same green as Montana pines, darted away from his face. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, her lips forming a thin line. It was the same silence that had greeted him yesterday when he'd found those bruises, the same wall of fear that no amount of patient coaxing had been able to breach. "Did someone bother you today?" he asked, keeping his voice soft, despite the rage building in his chest like steam in a pressure cooker. A shadow fell across them, and Marcus looked up to see Principal Hartwell approaching with the kind of forced smile that politicians and used car salesmen had perfected. Dorothy Hartwell was a thin woman in her 50s who wore authority like an ill-fitting suit, constantly adjusting and repositioning it to maintain the illusion of control. "Mr. Donovan," she called out, her voice carrying that particular brand of false cheer that made Marcus's teeth ache. "I'm so glad I caught you. I wanted to discuss Emma's situation." Marcus stood slowly, positioning himself between the principal and his daughter. What situation would that be? Hartwell's smile wavered. "Well, yesterday's incident. I've spoken with the children involved, and it seems there was just a small misunderstanding. You know how kids can be. Sometimes they play a little rough without meaning any harm." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd heard similar euphemisms before, usually from commanding officers trying to downplay civilian casualties or bureaucrats explaining away intelligence failures. The sanitized language of people who'd never had to clean up the real mess. A misunderstanding. Marcus repeated the words slowly, tasting their bitter inadequacy. "Is that what we're calling it when 4 fifth-graders corner an 8-year-old girl in the bathroom and leave bruises on her arms?" The principal's face flushed. "Mr. Donovan, I understand you're upset, but we need to be careful about making accusations." Where were the teachers? The question came out harder than he'd intended, carrying enough edge to make several nearby parents glance in their direction. "Our staff can't be everywhere at once," Hartwell replied, her voice taking on a defensive tone. "These things happen in schools. Children need to learn to work through their conflicts." Marcus felt Emma's hand slip into his, her small fingers cold despite the afternoon warmth. The simple gesture hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. Here was his daughter, seeking comfort from the one person in the world who was supposed to protect her, while the very institution charged with her safety served up excuses like day-old coffee. "Mrs. Hartwell," Marcus said, his voice dropping to the quiet register that had once made enemy combatants reconsider their life choices. I want the names of the children involved, and I want to know exactly what steps you're taking to ensure this never happens again." The principal's face went pale, and Marcus saw something flicker in her eyes, not just fear, but recognition, as if she'd been expecting this conversation, preparing for it. "I'm afraid I can't discuss other students with you, Mr. Donovan. Privacy policies, you understand." But Marcus understood something else entirely. He understood the taste of lies. Marcus stood there for a long moment, studying the principal's face like he'd once studied terrain maps before a mission. The nervous tick at the corner of her left eye, the way her fingers worried at the small cross pendant hanging from her neck, the subtle shift in her stance that suggested she was preparing to retreat, all of it painted a picture he didn't like. "Privacy policies," he repeated, his voice flat. "Right." He squeezed Emma's hand gently and guided her toward his motorcycle, feeling Hartwell's eyes tracking their movement. The conversation was over, but the war had just begun. As he helped Emma with her helmet, he caught sight of other parents watching from the safety of their minivans and sedans, their faces carrying that particular expression of people observing a car accident, horrified fascination mixed with relief that it wasn't happening to them. The ride home through Cedar Falls was a 15-minute journey down Main Street, past the hardware store where old-timers gathered to solve the world's problems over coffee, and past the diner that served the best apple pie in 3 counties. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, where the biggest scandal usually involved someone's teenage daughter staying out past curfew, a place where Marcus had thought he could disappear, become just another face in the crowd. He'd been naive to think geography could erase what he'd been. Their house sat on 3 acres at the edge of town, a modest 2-story structure that Marcus had spent the better part of 5 years renovating. Every board, every nail, every coat of paint had been applied with the methodical precision of a man trying to build something permanent in a world that had taught him nothing lasted. The wraparound porch where Emma liked to read on summer evenings, the tire swing hanging from the old oak tree that had been Sarah's dying wish, the workshop behind the house where he restored motorcycles and pretended his hands weren't still trained to kill, all of it represented the life he'd fought to create. Inside, the house carried the comfortable chaos of a single father doing his best. Emma's drawings covered the refrigerator like colorful shields against the mundane realities of grocery lists and school schedules. Her latest creation showed 2 figures standing beside a motorcycle, one tall, one small, both smiling under a sky filled with butterflies. In Emma's world, Marcus realized, he was still the hero who could fix anything. The thought made his chest tight. "Homework first," he said gently, watching as Emma nodded and headed upstairs with her backpack. She paused at the landing, looking back at him with those pine-green eyes that missed nothing despite her difficulties with words. "Dad?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you mad at me?" The question hit him like shrapnel. "No, Butterfly, I'm not mad at you. I could never be mad at you." She nodded, seeming to accept this truth, and disappeared into her room. Marcus stood alone in the hallway, surrounded by the photographs that chronicled their life together. Emma's first day of school, grinning despite her nervousness. The 2 of them at the county fair, sharing cotton candy that had turned her fingers pink. Birthday parties and Christmas mornings and ordinary Tuesday afternoons that had somehow become precious because they represented everything he'd never expected to have. In the kitchen, he started dinner, mac and cheese from a box, because it was one of the few foods Emma would eat consistently, her autism making her relationship with food as complicated as everything else. While the water boiled, he found himself staring out the window at the mountains that ringed their valley like protective giants. 15 years ago, those peaks had represented sanctuary. Now they felt like prison walls. His phone buzzed against the counter, a text from Joe Brennan at the garage where Marcus worked part-time. "Got a 72 Bonneville, needs some love. You free tomorrow?" Marcus typed back a quick confirmation, grateful for the distraction. Working on motorcycles was meditation, a way to channel his restless energy into something constructive. The garage also provided the perfect cover story for a man whose military pension and savings couldn't quite explain the comfortable life he'd built for Emma. As he stirred cheese powder into pasta, Marcus caught his reflection in the kitchen window. 52 years old, gray threading through hair that had once been dark as midnight, lines around his eyes that spoke of too much sun and too many sleepless nights. He looked like what he was, a man carrying weight that couldn't be measured in pounds. Emma appeared in the doorway, having changed into her favorite pajamas decorated with tiny motorcycles. "Is dinner ready?" "Almost." He plated their food, noting how she arranged her pasta into neat rows before eating, finding order in chaos the way her mind required. They ate in comfortable silence, but Marcus found himself studying every expression that crossed her face, searching for clues about what had happened at school, what was happening now. After dinner, as Emma settled in front of the television with a nature documentary about butterflies, Marcus stepped onto the porch and lit a cigarette, one of many bad habits he'd never quite managed to quit. The evening air carried the scent of pine and the distant promise of snow, reminding him that winter was coming whether he was ready or not. His phone rang. Unknown number, Donovan. Silence stretched across the connection, broken only by the soft sound of breathing. Then, a voice he didn't recognize, male, careful, with just a hint of accent he couldn't place. "Some fights can't be avoided, Steele." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone in his hand, the glowing screen fading to black as the silence of Cedar Falls settled around him like a shroud. The cigarette burned forgotten between his fingers, ash drifting onto the porch boards he'd sanded and stained with his own hands 3 summers ago. Steele. Nobody had called him that in 15 years. The name belonged to another life, another man who'd moved through shadows and foreign cities like smoke, leaving behind nothing but silence and carefully orchestrated accidents. Marcus Donovan was a motorcycle mechanic who made mac and cheese and read bedtime stories about butterflies. Steele was a ghost that was supposed to stay buried. He crushed the cigarette under his boot and stepped back inside, his eyes automatically finding Emma on the couch. She was absorbed in her documentary, completely unaware that their world had just shifted on its axis. The narrator's soothing voice described migration patterns, while Marcus felt his past circling back like a predator testing the wind. The house suddenly felt exposed, its windows like eyes that couldn't close. Marcus moved through the familiar rooms, checking locks and sight lines with muscle memory that had never truly faded. The kitchen window offered a clear view of the driveway. The back door opened onto 30 yards of open ground before the tree line. Upstairs, Emma's bedroom faced east toward town, while his own looked out over the mountains where headlights would be visible for miles. He'd chosen this house for its tactical advantages, though he'd told himself at the time it was for the school district and the quiet neighborhood. Even in civilian life, old instincts died hard. "Dad?" Emma's voice carried from the living room. "Are you okay? You're doing your walking thing." Marcus forced himself to stop pacing and return to the couch, settling beside his daughter with practiced calm, just thinking butterfly. She studied his face with the intense focus she usually reserved for her nature shows. "You look worried, like when you watch the news about bad places." The observation cut deeper than he'd expected. Emma might struggle with social cues, but she read him like an open book, seeing through the masks that had fooled intelligence officers and enemy combatants alike. There was no hiding from the one person who knew him best. "Sometimes grown-ups have to think about complicated things," he said carefully. "But that doesn't mean you need to worry." Emma considered this, then reached for the remote and paused her show. "Is it about the kids at school? The mean ones?" Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "What do you know about mean kids?" "They call me names. Freak girl. Weirdo." Her voice was matter-of-fact, as if she was describing the weather. "They pushed me yesterday because I wouldn't give them my lunch money. But it's okay because you're going to fix it." The simple faith in her words nearly broke him. Here was his daughter, accepting cruelty as an inevitable part of her world, while trusting absolutely in his ability to make it right. The weight of that trust was crushing and empowering in equal measure. "Who are they, Emma? Tell me their names." "Tyler Brennan, Katie Walsh, Mason Burke, and—" She hesitated, her brow furrowing in concentration. "The big one. Connor something." Marcus memorized each name while his mind raced through connections. Brennan, like Joe at the garage. Walsh, as in Chief Walsh, who ran the local police. Burke, probably related to the Burkes who owned half the commercial property in town. These weren't random bullies. These were the children of Cedar Falls' most prominent families. The phone call suddenly took on new dimensions. Someone wasn't just threatening him. They were targeting his daughter through a carefully orchestrated campaign of intimidation. The question was why now, after 15 years of peaceful anonymity? "Emma," he said gently, "has anyone else talked to you at school? Any adults you don't know?" She shook her head, then stopped. "Wait. There was a man yesterday. After the pushing, he found me crying by the swings and gave me a tissue. He said he knew you from before, when you were a soldier." Marcus felt the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. What did he look like? Old like you, but with yellow hair and a scar on his hand. He smelled like cigarettes and medicine. Emma's face scrunched in concentration. "He said to tell you that Charlie sends his regards." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Charlie Voss, CIA operative, mercenary, and the man responsible for Sarah's death. The man Marcus had supposedly killed in a warehouse fire outside Prague 12 years ago. Marcus stood abruptly, his mind already cataloging weapons locations and escape routes. The Glock in the bedroom safe, the go bag hidden in the workshop, the emergency cash and documents in the false bottom of Emma's toy box, everything a careful father might need if their past came calling. But looking down at his daughter, still trusting, still believing in his ability to protect her, Marcus realized that running wasn't an option anymore. Cedar Falls was their home, Emma's doctors, her routine, her safe spaces. Everything she needed was here. The choice crystallized with perfect clarity. He could disappear into the night, take Emma somewhere new, and spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders. Or he could stay and fight, using every skill he'd spent 15 years trying to forget. For Emma's sake, there was really no choice at all. Marcus stood frozen in their living room, the weight of that crystallized choice pressing down on him like a collapsed building. But even as the words echoed in his mind, for Emma's sake, there was really no choice at all. Doubt crept in like poison gas, seeping through the cracks in his resolve. He watched Emma restart her butterfly documentary, her small face bathed in the television's blue glow, completely unaware that her father was contemplating a return to the shadow world that had already cost her so much. Sarah's death had been the price of his first life. What would be the cost of reclaiming it? The Glock called to him from upstairs, 47 steps away, he knew without counting. Muscle memory could have it in his hands in under 2 minutes, loaded and ready. But then what? Hunt down Charlie Voss through the streets of Cedar Falls like some kind of suburban assassin? Turn their quiet Montana town into a battleground? Marcus sank back onto the couch, his hands trembling almost imperceptibly. The same hands that had once disabled explosive devices and eliminated targets with surgical precision now shook at the thought of what they might have to do again. "Dad, you're making the face," Emma said without looking away from her show. The bad thinking face. He forced his expression to smooth, but the knot in his stomach only tightened. She was reading him again, seeing through 15 years of carefully constructed normalcy to the killer underneath. How long before everyone else started seeing it too? Because that's what he was considering. Becoming Steel again. The man who'd left bodies across 3 continents in service of causes he'd barely understood. The man whose enemies had murdered his wife in a hospital parking lot to send a message. The man who'd sworn over Sarah's grave that he was done with violence, done with the game that devoured everything he touched. But Charlie Voss was alive. Somehow, impossibly, the bastard had survived Prague and spent 12 years planning, what? Revenge? A recruitment attempt? Marcus had made enemies across the intelligence community when he'd walked away, choosing family over flag, love over loyalty to an agency that viewed people as expendable assets. The rational part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive through countless operations, began cataloging the impossibilities. If Charlie was alive, why wait until now? Why target Emma through school bullies instead of simply eliminating them both efficiently and quietly? Why the elaborate psychological warfare? Unless the goal wasn't elimination, unless someone wanted Steele to resurface. The thought hit him like ice water. What if this entire scenario, the bullying, the phone call, the messenger with yellow hair, was designed to force his hand? What if walking back into that world was exactly what they wanted? Marcus closed his eyes and saw Sarah's face, pale against the hospital pillow 3 days before Emma was born. "Promise me," she'd whispered, her hand pressed against her swollen belly. "Promise me you'll be different for her. Promise me you'll choose love over fear." He'd kept that promise for 15 years. Chosen PTA meetings over missions. Chosen bedtime stories over briefings. Chosen to be a father instead of an operator, even when every instinct screamed at him to eliminate threats with extreme prejudice. But what happened when love and fear pointed in the same direction? When protecting Emma meant becoming everything he'd sworn never to be again? "The butterflies migrate thousands of miles," Emma said suddenly, her voice filled with wonder. "They don't know where they're going, but they know they have to go." Marcus opened his eyes, studying his daughter's profile. 8 years old and already wise in ways that broke his heart. "Sometimes we don't have choices, butterfly." "Daddy had to migrate too," she said, still watching the screen. "From the soldier place to here. But you found where you belong." Had he? Or had he simply been hiding, waiting for the past to catch up? The questions circled in his mind like vultures, picking at his certainty until nothing remained but doubt and the terrible knowledge that any action, or inaction, could destroy the life they'd built. The house creaked around them, familiar sounds that had once meant safety now seeming ominous. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every phone call could bring news that would change everything. The paranoia that had kept him alive in hostile territory was awakening, and Marcus wasn't sure he could control it anymore. He thought about Joe at the garage, about the parent-teacher conferences and school plays he attended, about the carefully normal life he'd constructed board by board, day by day. All of it felt fragile now, like a house of cards waiting for the slightest breeze to bring it down. Outside, Cedar Falls settled into evening quiet, streetlights beginning to flicker on like beacons in the growing darkness. Somewhere out there, Charlie Voss was waiting. Somewhere out there, children who'd hurt his daughter were sleeping safely in their beds, protected by parents who had no idea what kind of monster they'd awakened. Marcus reached for his phone, then stopped. One call could set everything in motion. One text to an encrypted number could bring help, or bring hell down on all their heads. The choice was still there, crystalline and terrible, but now he wasn't sure he had the strength to make it. Marcus sat motionless on the couch for 3 heartbeats, then stood with the fluid precision of a man who'd made his choice. The doubt didn't disappear. It crystallized into something harder, more useful. Fear for Emma's safety. Time for bed, butterfly. Emma looked up from her documentary, those pine-green eyes studying his face with uncomfortable intensity. "You're different now." Your voice changed. The observation sent a chill through him. If an 8-year-old could see the transformation, how long before everyone else noticed Steele bleeding through Marcus's carefully constructed facade? "Just tired," he lied, but his movements betrayed him as he checked the front door locks with tactical efficiency rather than paternal routine. Emma followed him upstairs, her small footsteps echoing his larger ones on the hardwood he'd installed with his own hands that were now mentally cataloging weapons placements and exit strategies. In Emma's room, he knelt beside her bed as she settled under covers decorated with monarch butterflies. The irony wasn't lost on him. Creatures that navigated thousands of miles by instinct, following patterns written in their DNA whether they understood them or not. "Dad?" Emma's voice was small in the darkness. "Are you going away?" The question struck him like a blade between the ribs. "What makes you ask that? You're looking at me like you're trying to remember, like when you look at Mommy's pictures." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. Sarah had been gone for 8 years, but Emma was right. He did study those photographs with desperate intensity, fighting to preserve details that time kept stealing. Now he was looking at his living daughter the same way, as if she might disappear. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, and meant it. This wasn't about running anymore. This was about making a stand. After Emma fell asleep, Marcus moved through the house with purpose. The Glock came out of the bedroom safe, weight familiar and terrible in his palm. The go-bag emerged from behind the workshop wall, its contents intact after years of neglect: cash, documents, weapons, everything needed for a life that traveled light and disappeared quickly. But instead of packing, he began to unpack. Not the bag, but 15 years of carefully buried instincts. He pulled out his old encrypted phone, a device he'd kept charged but never used, telling himself it was mere caution. His thumb hovered over the power button. One call to Langley would confirm Charlie Voss's status, dead or alive, active or freelance. Another call could bring a protection detail, witness relocation, a new life somewhere Charlie couldn't follow. Marcus powered on the phone and watched it search for signal. 3 bars. The network still recognized his credentials. But as his finger moved toward the keypad, Emma's words echoed in his memory. Daddy had to migrate too. From the soldier place to here. But you found where you belong. She was wrong. He'd never found where he belonged. He'd built it. Board by board, day by day, bedtime story by bedtime story. This house wasn't just shelter, it was proof that Steele could become Marcus, that a killer could learn to nurture life instead of ending it. Charlie Voss wanted to take that away. Wanted to drag him back into the shadows where children were acceptable casualties and love was a liability. The bullying campaign wasn't random cruelty. It was psychological warfare designed to force Steele's return. Marcus set down the encrypted phone and picked up his regular cell, scrolling to a number he'd memorized but never dialed. Not Langley, not his old handler. Dr. Sarah Chen, Emma's developmental pediatrician, who worked late reviewing cases and would understand why a worried father might need an emergency consultation. The call connected on the second ring. "Dr. Chen? It's Marcus Donovan, Emma's father." His voice was steady, controlled. "I need to ask you about trauma responses in autistic children." As he spoke, Marcus found himself looking out the kitchen window at the mountains that ringed their valley. For 15 years, those peaks had represented safety, sanctuary, the walls of a fortress where Steele could hibernate and Marcus could flourish. Now he saw them differently. Not as walls to hide behind, but as battlements to defend. The choice was made, but not the one he'd expected. He wasn't becoming Steele again. He was evolving into something new, a father who would use every skill the shadow world had taught him, but in service of love instead of flag. A protector who understood that sometimes the only way to preserve peace was to be prepared for war. Charlie Voss had made one critical miscalculation. He'd assumed that threatening Emma would resurrect Steele, the cold operative who followed orders and accepted casualties. Instead, he'd awakened something far more dangerous, a father with nothing left to lose. "Thank you for taking my call so late," Marcus said, settling into the kitchen chair where he could watch both the driveway and the stairs leading to Emma's room. "I need to understand how traumatic stress might manifest in a child with Emma's particular needs." Dr. Chen's voice carried the warm professionalism that had made her Emma's advocate for 3 years. "Has something happened?" Emma seemed well at her last appointment. Marcus chose his words carefully. The pediatrician knew nothing of his past, saw only a devoted single father who asked thoughtful questions and followed treatment protocols religiously. "She's been having difficulties at school, bullying. I'm concerned about how to help her process what she's experiencing without making it worse." As Dr. Chen outlined trauma responses, regression, increased stimming, sleep disruption, Marcus found his tactical mind overlaying her clinical observations with operational intelligence. Emma's recent behaviors weren't just stress reactions, they were data points in a psychological warfare campaign designed to destabilize both of them. "The most important thing," Dr. Chen continued, "is maintaining her sense of safety and routine. Autistic children need predictability to feel secure. Any major changes to her environment or your relationship could amplify the trauma exponentially." Major changes. Like her father reverting to his old life. Like discovering the man who read her bedtime stories had once killed people for a living. Marcus thanked the doctor and ended the call, but her words echoed in the quiet kitchen. Emma needed stability, not the chaos that followed Steele wherever he went. She needed a father who attended school plays, not an operative who disappeared for weeks on classified missions. The encrypted phone buzzed against the table, an incoming message on a channel that had been silent for over a decade. Marcus stared at the device, knowing that reading whatever waited there would cross a line he'd maintained for 15 years. He opened the message. "Time to come home, Steele. Your daughter's safety depends on how quickly you remember who you really are. See." Attached was a photograph taken through a telephoto lens, Emma on the school playground, isolated near the monkey bars, while other children played in groups nearby. The timestamp showed yesterday, 2:47 p.m. Someone had been watching, documenting, preparing. Marcus deleted the message and powered down the phone, but the image burned in his mind. His daughter, alone and vulnerable, while he'd been fixing carburetors and pretending the past was dead. A sound from upstairs froze him mid-thought. Emma's door creaking open. Light footsteps on the hardwood, then her voice, small and uncertain, "Dad, I had a bad dream." He found her halfway down the stairs, clutching the stuffed butterfly he'd given her for her 6th birthday. In the dim hallway light, she looked impossibly fragile, and Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside him. Not the cold calculation of steel, but something fiercer and more protective. "Want to talk about it?" he asked, scooping her up despite her protests that she was too big to be carried. She weighed nothing, all sharp elbows and bird-hollow bones. The man with yellow hair was in it, she whispered against his shoulder. "He said you were going to leave me alone." Marcus carried her to the kitchen, setting her on the counter while he made hot chocolate, their ritual for chasing away nightmares. But as he worked, his mind raced through implications. Charlie wasn't just threatening Emma, he was manipulating her dreams, her sense of security. This wasn't recruitment, this was psychological torture of a child. "Emma," he said carefully, "did the man yesterday say anything else? Besides the message for me?" She stirred her hot chocolate with intense concentration. "He asked if I liked puzzles. Then he showed me a picture on his phone, a lady with dark hair like mine. He said she was my mommy, but that wasn't right because mommy has short hair in all our pictures." The mug slipped in Marcus's hand, hot liquid splashing across the counter. Sarah had worn her hair long when they'd first met, before Emma was born. Only a handful of photographs captured her that way, and none of them should have been accessible to Charlie Voss. Unless Charlie had been watching them much longer than Marcus had realized. Unless the move to Cedar Falls, the quiet life, the careful anonymity, all of it had been an illusion. "Dad, you're making the scary face again." Marcus forced his features to relax, but inside, something cold and analytical was taking inventory. Charlie had resources, surveillance capabilities, and detailed intelligence about their life. He was patient, methodical, and willing to traumatize a child to achieve his objectives. But he'd made one crucial error. He'd assumed that threatening Emma would force Marcus to play by the old rules, to enter the shadow world where Charlie held every advantage. Marcus looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw not a vulnerability to be protected, but a reason to rewrite the rules entirely. "Finish your chocolate, butterfly," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, we're going to have some very important conversations." The war was coming to Cedar Falls, but it would be fought on Marcus's terms, not Steele's. The next morning arrived gray and cold, frost painting the windows like spiderwebs. Marcus had slept in 2-hour shifts, old habits asserting themselves as his body remembered the rhythm of maintaining watch. Each time he'd checked on Emma, she'd been curled around her butterfly, breathing steady and peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm building in his mind. Over breakfast, he watched her methodically eat her cereal, arranging the pieces by color before taking each bite. The routine that had once seemed quirky now felt precious, something to be protected at any cost. When she finished, he cleared his throat. "Butterfly, we need to talk about some changes." Emma's spoon paused midway to her mouth. "I don't like changes." "I know, but sometimes changes help keep us safe." Marcus chose his words carefully, remembering Dr. Chen's warnings about disrupting her sense of security. "Starting today, Mrs. Patterson is going to walk you to and from school instead of you taking the bus." "Why?" Because a ghost from his past was using her as leverage. Because the playground where she'd been photographed might as well be a kill zone. Because every moment she spent outside his direct protection was a moment Charlie could exploit. Because I asked her to, he said instead. Dorothy Patterson, their 70-year-old neighbor, had already agreed when he'd called at dawn. She'd seemed pleased to help, mentioning how quiet the neighborhood had become since her own grandchildren moved away. Emma processed this information with the deliberate consideration she applied to everything. Will you still be here when I get home? The question carried weight that made his chest tight. Every day. But there might be times when other people come to visit. People who knew me before we moved here. If that happens, I need you to go to the safe room we're going to make. Like a fort? Exactly like a fort. Just for you. They spent the next hour converting the walk-in pantry off the kitchen into what Marcus told Emma was her special room. To her, it became an adventure, installing battery-powered LED strips, stocking it with snacks and water, adding a comfortable cushion and some of her favorite books. She didn't need to know about the reinforced door frame he'd installed during construction, or that the room could be locked from the inside with a deadbolt that wouldn't yield to anything short of explosives. When Mrs. Patterson arrived to walk Emma to school, Marcus felt the first fracture in their carefully constructed normalcy. Emma clung to his leg longer than usual, her small hands fisting in his jeans. "Dad feels different," she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. Marcus knelt to her level, meeting those perceptive green eyes. "I'm still your dad. That will never change. But sometimes dads have to be extra careful to keep their butterflies safe." After they left, the house fell into a silence that felt more like vacuum than peace. Marcus stood at the kitchen window, watching until Emma's bright purple backpack disappeared around the corner, then allowed himself to become someone else. The transformation was subtle but complete. His posture shifted from the relaxed stance of a mechanic to the coiled readiness of an operator. His eyes began cataloging sightlines, escape routes, potential ambush points. The house he'd built as a sanctuary now revealed itself as a defensive position. Good cover, multiple exits, clear fields of fire from the upper windows. He called Joe at the garage, keeping his voice casual despite the weight of what he was about to do. "I need to take some personal time. Family situation. Everything okay with Emma?" Joe's concern was genuine, another reminder of the life Marcus was risking by engaging with his past. "She's fine. Just need to handle some business." Next, he called the school, speaking with Principal Hawthorne about Emma's safety. He kept the details vague, concerned about strangers in the area, wanted to ensure no one picked her up without his explicit permission. Hawthorne agreed readily, perhaps remembering their previous conversation about the bullying incident. With Emma's immediate security addressed, Marcus turned his attention to the real work. The encrypted phone remained silent, but he knew Charlie was waiting, probably expecting him to make contact, to play by the old rules of engagement. Instead, Marcus began making different calls on his regular phone. To the courthouse, requesting property records. To the local newspaper, asking about archived articles from 12 years ago when he'd first arrived in Cedar Falls. To the Montana Department of Motor Vehicles, inquiring about vehicle registrations for certain license plates he'd memorized. If Charlie wanted to play games, Marcus would accommodate him. But this game would be played in the light, using tools the shadow world rarely considered: public records, community connections, the very normalcy Charlie was trying to destroy. The irony wasn't lost on him. To protect the life he'd built as Marcus, he would have to think like Steel. But he wouldn't become Steel. He couldn't afford to. Not with Emma depending on him to remain her father first and everything else second. By noon, the first pieces of information began flowing back, and Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction of an operation taking shape. Charlie had made his move in the shadows. Now it was Marcus's turn. The first call came at 12:47 p.m., just as Marcus was reviewing property records spread across his kitchen table. Emma's school, caller ID flashing urgent. "Mr. Donovan?" Principal Hawthorne's voice carried a tension that made Marcus's blood freeze. "Emma's missing." The words hit him like a physical blow. The property records scattered as he lurched to his feet, the chair clattering backward. "What do you mean, missing?" "She was in Ms. Rodriguez's classroom 15 minutes ago." When the teacher turned around, Emma was gone. "We've searched the building." Marcus was already moving, grabbing keys and the Glock from the kitchen drawer. "I'm coming. Lock down the school. No one leaves until I get there." The drive to Riverside Elementary took 4 minutes. It should have taken 8, but Marcus ran every red light, his mind cycling through tactical assessments while his heart hammered against his ribs. This was his greatest fear made manifest: Emma vulnerable, alone, in the hands of someone who saw children as acceptable casualties. The school parking lot buzzed with activity. 2 sheriff's deputies flanked the main entrance while teachers herded confused students into classrooms. Marcus spotted Charlie immediately, leaning against a black SUV at the far end of the lot, yellow hair catching the afternoon sun, that familiar predator's smile playing across his lips. Their eyes met across 50 yards of asphalt. Charlie raised his phone in a mock salute, then climbed into the SUV and drove away. Marcus's vision tunneled, combat instincts screaming at him to pursue, to end this with violence and fury. But Emma's voice echoed in his memory. "You're looking at me like you're trying to remember." She needed her father, not Steele. She needed him thinking clearly, not drowning in rage. Inside the school, chaos reigned beneath a veneer of professional control. Principal Hawthorne met him at the door, her usual composure cracking. "We've contacted the police. They're on their way. Tell me exactly what happened." Ms. Rodriguez, Emma's teacher, appeared pale and shaken. She was working on her math problems. "I was helping another student when I heard the classroom door close." Emma's desk was empty. Her backpack and butterfly keychain were gone. Marcus studied the classroom with predator's eyes. The door faced away from the teacher's desk, a blind spot any professional would exploit. "Security cameras? We're checking, but the hallway camera has been malfunctioning for 2 weeks." Of course it had. Charlie would have disabled it days ago, maybe weeks, planning every detail while Marcus played house and pretended the past was buried. Sheriff Martinez arrived with sirens and procedure, asking the same questions Marcus had already answered. Time bleeding away while his daughter remained in the hands of a man who viewed human life as currency. Marcus found himself calculating distances, response times, the brutal mathematics of how long Emma could survive if Charlie decided she'd outlived her usefulness. The encrypted phone buzzed in his pocket. Marcus stepped away from the crowd, fingers trembling as he opened the message. "Playground behind the old Methodist church on Elm Street. 1 hour. Come alone, or your daughter learns what happens to loose ends. See." Attached was a video file. Marcus's thumb hesitated over the play button, knowing that whatever he saw would change everything. He pressed it anyway. Emma sat in what looked like a basement or storage room, still clutching her butterfly keychain, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't hurt yet, but her small voice carried a terror that cut him deeper than any blade. "Daddy? The man says you have to come get me. He says if you don't, Mommy won't be the only one who goes away forever." The video ended. Marcus stared at the blank screen, feeling 15 years of careful control disintegrate. Charlie hadn't just taken his daughter, he was traumatizing her, weaponizing her autism against her, using her deepest fears as psychological torture. In that moment, Marcus understood that every choice he'd made since arriving in Cedar Falls had been leading to this. The quiet life, the careful distance from his past, the desperate hope that love could somehow armor them against the violence that had defined his former existence. All of it had been preparation for a test he'd prayed would never come. Sheriff Martinez appeared at his elbow. "Mr. Donovan? Any idea who might have taken Emma?" Marcus looked at the man, honest, well-meaning, completely unprepared for what was coming to his quiet town. The truth would mean explanations, federal involvement, procedures and protocols that would get Emma killed, while bureaucrats argued jurisdiction. "No," Marcus lied, pocketing the phone. "No idea." He had 53 minutes to save his daughter's life, 53 minutes to become the thing he'd sworn he'd never be again. As he walked toward his truck, Marcus felt the last walls between his old life and new one crumble. Charlie wanted Steele? He was about to discover what happened when you threatened everything Steele had ever loved. The ordeal had begun. The playground behind the old Methodist church sat empty. Autumn wind pushing a forgotten swing in lazy arcs that squeaked like dying birds. Marcus crouched behind a maintenance shed 50 yards away, studying the scene through binoculars as precious minutes ticked past. No sign of Emma, no sign of Charlie, just an empty meeting ground that screamed trap with every shadow. 47 minutes had become 32, had become 18. Each second carved away another piece of his control, another fragment of the careful father he'd built from the ashes of the killer he'd been. The encrypted phone remained silent in his pocket, Charlie's last message burning in his memory alongside that video of Emma's terrified face. "If you don't, Mommy won't be the only one who goes away forever." Marcus had come prepared for war. Tactical vest beneath his jacket, the Glock at his hip, spare magazines distributed across his body with muscle memory precision. He'd even retrieved the go bag from its hiding spot in the garage, the one Emma didn't know existed, filled with documents and cash and weapons from a life he'd sworn was dead. But as the minutes bled away, and the playground remained empty, he understood with crystalline clarity that Charlie had never intended to meet him here. This was misdirection, a magician's flourish, while the real trick happened elsewhere. While Marcus crouched in the cold dirt playing by rules Charlie had written, his daughter was... The encrypted phone buzzed. "Change of plans, Steele. Your cop friends are very thorough, but I needed time to get comfortable. New location, the old mining road off Route 19, mile marker 7. You have 15 minutes, and this time I'll know if you're not alone. Bring the drive." "See." "The drive." Marcus stared at the words, ice forming in his chest. Charlie wasn't just talking about any storage device. He meant the encrypted hard drive Marcus had taken from their last operation together, 15 years ago. The one containing enough classified intelligence to topple governments. The one Marcus had hidden so thoroughly he'd almost convinced himself it didn't exist. But Charlie knew, had always known. This wasn't about recruitment or settling old scores. This was about the most dangerous secret Marcus had ever carried. And Charlie was using Emma to extract it. Marcus ran for his truck, gravel spraying as he accelerated toward the highway. 15 minutes to mile marker 7. 12 minutes to retrieve the drive from its hiding place. The math was impossible, and Charlie knew it. He floored the accelerator, the speedometer climbing past 90 as he raced toward his house. The truck's engine screamed, but not as loud as the voice in his head cataloging all the ways this could end in disaster. Even if he retrieved the drive, even if he made the exchange, Charlie couldn't afford to leave witnesses. Emma had seen his face, could identify him. In the cold arithmetic of their former profession, she was a liability that needed elimination. The house appeared ahead, and Marcus took the turn into his driveway on 2 wheels. He sprinted to the garage, fingers flying over the combination lock of a floor safe hidden beneath his workbench. The drive sat in its protective case, smaller than a deck of cards, but containing enough secrets to justify any atrocity. 8 minutes. He was back in the truck when his regular phone rang. "Sheriff Martinez?" "Marcus, we found something." Emma's butterfly keychain was discovered in the parking lot of Miller's Hardware, along with what looks like a struggle. "We're setting up a perimeter." Marcus ended the call. Miller's Hardware was 15 miles in the opposite direction from mile marker 7. Another misdirection, or Charlie was moving Emma again, staying ahead of law enforcement while the net tightened. Either way, it didn't matter. Marcus had one play left, and it required him to trust that Charlie's greed would override his caution. The mining road appeared on his right, a dirt track winding into the forest toward abandoned claims that hadn't produced ore in decades. Marcus's headlights carved through gathering darkness as he climbed toward marker 7, every instinct screaming that he was driving into a kill zone. The truck's high beams illuminated the meeting point, a small clearing where the road widened, surrounded by dense pine that could hide a dozen shooters. A single figure stood in the center, but it wasn't Charlie. It was Emma. She stood perfectly still in the cone of light, her purple jacket bright against the darkness, no longer crying but wearing the blank expression she retreated into when the world became too overwhelming to process. Alone. Unguarded. Bait. Marcus slammed the brakes, gravel sliding beneath the tires as tactical awareness warred with paternal instinct. Every fiber of his training told him this was a trap, that Charlie was watching from the tree line with a rifle scope trained on Emma's small form. But she was right there, 50 feet away, and the drive in his pocket suddenly felt like a fair trade for her life. He stepped out of the truck, hands visible but ready to move. "Emma, it's Dad!" She turned toward his voice, and Marcus saw something die in her eyes. Not relief, but a terrible recognition. She wasn't looking at her father anymore. She was looking at Steele, and she was afraid of what she saw. The last wall between his old life and new crumbled completely, and Marcus realized that even if he saved her, he might have already lost everything that mattered. Marcus froze, his daughter's fear cutting deeper than any blade ever could. The tactical vest beneath his jacket felt like armor against the wrong enemy. He'd prepared for Charlie's bullets, but not for Emma's recognition of what he'd become. "Emma, it's okay," he said softly, forcing his voice back to the gentle tone she knew. "Dad's here to take you home." But she took a step backward, her small hands clutching the butterfly keychain against her chest. In the harsh glare of the headlights, Marcus saw himself through her eyes, coiled tension, predator's stance, the cold calculation of violence radiating from every line of his body. This wasn't the man who made her breakfast and helped with homework. This was Steele, and she instinctively understood the danger. "You look different," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the truck's idling engine. "Like the man said you would." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "What man, Butterfly? What did he tell you?" "He said—" Emma's voice cracked, autism making it harder for her to process the trauma, while fear made it worse. "He said, you weren't really my daddy. That you were someone else wearing Daddy's face." Charlie's psychological warfare, Marcus realized with sick clarity. The bastard had spent hours poisoning his daughter's mind, weaponizing her literal thinking and need for absolute truth. Classic interrogation tactics applied to a child who couldn't understand deception. A laser dot appeared on Emma's purple jacket, dancing across her chest like a crimson butterfly. "That's far enough, Steele." Charlie's voice drifted from the darkness beyond the tree line, distorted by distance and electronics. "Touching reunion, but we have business to discuss." Marcus forced himself to remain still, despite every instinct screaming at him to shield Emma with his body. Moving now would only give Charlie an excuse to pull the trigger. "Let her go, Charlie. This is between us." Laughter echoed through hidden speakers. Charlie had turned the forest into a theater, controlling every sight and sound. "Oh, but she's the most important part, don't you see? Emma represents your greatest weakness and your greatest lie." The laser dot moved to Emma's forehead. She stared at it with the fascination children showed fireflies, not understanding the death it represented. "You see, I've been watching you for years, Steele. Watching you play house, pretend to be a simple mechanic, convince yourself you could wash the blood off your hands with domestic bliss. But we both know what you really are. I know exactly what I am." Marcus kept his voice steady, paternal, hoping Emma could still hear her father beneath Steele's tactical calm. "I'm her dad. Nothing else matters." "Nothing else?" Charlie's voice carried mock surprise. "Not the 3 villages in Yemen that burned because of intel you provided? Not the arms dealers in Prague who disappeared after you passed their locations to Langley? You've got the blood of hundreds on your hands, Steele, and you want to pretend it washes off with bedtime stories?" Each accusation landed like a physical blow, not because they were lies, but because they were true. Marcus had done those things, ordered those deaths, made those calls that ended lives across 3 continents. He'd told himself it was justice, national security, the greater good. But standing here with his daughter's terror-filled eyes reflecting his true nature, the justifications crumbled. "Emma," he said softly, "whatever that man told you, I need you to know something. I have done bad things. Before you were born, before I became your dad, I hurt people. I made terrible choices." The laser dot steadied on Emma's chest as Charlie's electronic voice fell silent, apparently not expecting this confession. Marcus stepped closer, hands visible but ready. But the moment you came into my life, everything changed. You made me want to be better. You made me want to be the man you deserved as a father. But you're still the same person, Emma said with the brutal honesty only children possess. You just hid the scary parts. The truth of it staggered him. She was right. He hadn't transformed, hadn't been redeemed by love. He'd simply buried Steele beneath layers of domesticity, thinking he could wall off that part of himself forever. But standing here, armed and dangerous, calculating kill shots and escape routes while his daughter watched, Marcus understood the terrible reality. He was Steele wearing Marcus's face, not the other way around. "You're right," he whispered, the admission tearing from his chest. "I am the same person. But Emma," he knelt slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening. "The scary parts? They're here right now because I love you, because someone threatened the most important thing in my world." Understanding dawned in her green eyes, not forgiveness, but recognition. Her daddy wasn't gone. He'd simply revealed himself to be more complex, more dangerous, more desperate than she'd known. The laser dot wavered as Charlie's control over the situation began to slip. He'd orchestrated this revelation to break Marcus, but instead it had clarified everything. Marcus was both men, had always been both men. The question now was which one Emma would choose to trust. Emma stared at him for what felt like eternity, the laser dot still dancing across her jacket as Charlie waited in the darkness. Then, with the sudden decisiveness that autism sometimes gifted her, she ran toward Marcus. The red dot followed her movement, and Marcus tensed to throw himself between them, but Emma's small arms wrapped around his neck before Charlie could react. She pressed her face against his shoulder, and he felt her trembling, not with fear of him anymore, but with the overwhelming relief of a child who had found her anchor in a world gone incomprehensible. "I want to go home, Daddy," she whispered against his ear. "The man scared me, but you're still you. Just more." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling something fundamental shift in his chest. She'd chosen to trust both sides of him, the gentle father and the dangerous protector. The integration he'd spent 15 years avoiding had just been accomplished by an 8-year-old girl who saw the world in absolutes, but somehow understood that people could be complicated. "Well, isn't that touching?" Charlie's voice crackled through the speakers, bitter with frustrated manipulation. "But sentiment won't save her, Steele. You have something that belongs to me." Marcus stood slowly, Emma's weight familiar in his arms, but his voice carried Steele's edge now, not hidden from his daughter but honest about what the moment required. "The drive stays buried unless you guarantee safe passage. Both of us walk away. You're hardly in a position to negotiate. I have 2 rifles trained on you from different angles, enough explosives planted around this clearing to turn you both into pink mist, and the patience to wait until hypothermia makes your daughter too weak to run." But Marcus was already moving, using his body to shield Emma while his eyes tracked muzzle flashes in the darkness. There, behind the fallen log 30 yards northeast, and there, in the pine cluster due west, 2 shooters, just as Charlie claimed, but positioned for intimidation rather than optimal kill zones. Charlie wanted the drive too badly to risk destroying it along with them. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus called out, his voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who'd commanded death squads and black ops teams. "I'm walking back to my truck with my daughter. If you try to stop me, I'll kill everyone in these woods and burn the drive before you can reach it. You're bluffing. You'd never risk Emma's life on... Try me." The words came out flat, emotionless, carrying the weight of every life Marcus had ended without hesitation. "I've spent 15 years being her father, Charlie. You think I won't become something worse to keep her safe?" Silence stretched across the clearing. Marcus could practically hear Charlie recalculating, weighing his greed against his survival instinct. The encrypted drive contained state secrets worth millions, but only if Charlie lived to sell them. Emma lifted her head from Marcus's shoulder. "Daddy, there's a man behind that tree." She pointed with the literal precision of someone who processed the world differently. "And another one over there. Are they going to hurt us?" "Not if they're smart," Marcus replied, never taking his eyes off the tree line. "Steele." Charlie's voice carried a new note. Not quite panic, but the recognition that his psychological warfare had backfired spectacularly. "You think you can just walk away? I know where you live, where she goes to school. This ends when I say it ends." Marcus stopped walking, Emma still in his arms, and felt the last vestiges of his peaceful life crumble. Charlie was right. This would never end as long as he remained alive. There would always be another threat, another enemy from Marcus's past coming to collect debts written in blood. But Emma's arms around his neck reminded him of something crucial. He wasn't Steele trying to protect Marcus's life anymore. He was a father who happened to be the most dangerous man in 3 counties, and that combination made him something Charlie had never encountered. "You want the drive?" Marcus called out. "Then come and take it. But understand something. I'm not the man I was 15 years ago. I'm worse, because now I have something worth killing for." He reached his truck and gently placed Emma in the passenger seat, buckling her seatbelt with hands that remained perfectly steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Through the windshield, he could see the laser dots tracking them, but Charlie's shooters held their fire. "Where are we going?" Emma asked as Marcus started the engine. "Somewhere safe, while Daddy makes some phone calls." He pulled out his encrypted phone, scrolling through contacts he hadn't accessed in over a decade, names and numbers of people who owed him favors, who shared enemies, who understood that some threats required permanent solutions. For 15 years, Marcus had tried to outrun his past. Now it was time to use that past to secure his daughter's future. Charlie had made one critical error. He'd given Marcus a reason to stop pretending he was anything other than what he'd always been. The hunter was about to become the hunted. Marcus drove in silence for the first 5 miles, the encrypted phone burning like a coal in his jacket pocket, while Emma sat buckled beside him, still wearing her purple jacket with its invisible target. The truck's headlights carved through mountain darkness as his mind cataloged resources, weapons, and 15-year-old debts that could be called in before dawn. "Are you going to kill people?" Emma asked with the directness that autism afforded her, no social filter to soften the question that mattered most. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. 3 hours ago he would have deflected, changed the subject, protected her innocence. Now that luxury was gone, she'd seen Steele emerge, understood that violence lived beneath his skin like a secondary heartbeat. "Probably," he said quietly. "Would that make you afraid of me?" She considered this with the same methodical care she applied to math problems. "You killed people before I was born." "Yes, but you stopped, because of me. Because of you." The admission came easier than expected. "I wanted to be someone you could be proud of." "I am proud of you," Emma said, then paused. "But the man at school who pushes me down, sometimes I wish someone would push him harder." "Is that bad?" The innocent cruelty of childhood wrapped around deeper truths. Marcus pulled into a 24-hour diner parking lot, engine idling as he finally looked at his daughter, really looked at her. The purple jacket hung loose on her small frame, but her green eyes held new understanding. She'd been forced to grow up tonight, to see her father's true nature and somehow reconcile it with bedtime stories and Saturday morning pancakes. "No, Butterfly, that's human." He pulled out the encrypted phone. "I need to make some calls. Adult business. Can you color while I work?" Emma nodded, retrieving her ever-present sketchbook. Marcus watched her settle into the familiar routine, purple crayon moving across paper in precise patterns that made sense only to her, and felt something fundamental crystallize in his chest. For 15 years, he'd believed redemption meant burying Steele completely. But sitting here, watching his daughter accept both sides of him, Marcus realized the truth was more complex. He couldn't undo Yemen or Prague or the dozens of operations that stained his hands red. But he could ensure that Emma never faced those choices, never had to become what circumstances demanded. The first call went to Sophia Reyes in Miami, former CIA, now running private security for clients who preferred problems to disappear quietly. Her voice carried recognition despite the years between them. "Steele. Heard you were dead. Close enough. I need a favor, Sophia. Old school rules. What kind of favor?" Caution crept into her tone. Charlie Morrison surfaced. "Threatened my daughter." Silence stretched across the connection. Sophia had worked with both of them in the early days, before Charlie's methods became too extreme even for Black Ops standards. She understood what Marcus was really asking. "Jesus, Marcus, you've been out for 15 years. You sure you want back in?" "I was never out," Marcus said, watching Emma color. "I was just pretending. What do you need?" "Cleanup crew, 2 safe houses, and a forensic specialist who doesn't ask questions. Charlie's got support, at least 2 shooters, possibly more. I need to know who's backing him. That's not a favor, that's a war." Marcus looked at Emma's purple butterfly taking shape on the paper, wings spread wide, ready for flight. "Then it's a war. Are you in or out?" Sophia's laugh held no humor. "You always were crazy, Steele, but you paid your debts when it mattered. I'll have people in Cedar Falls by morning." The second call went to Tommy Nguyen in Seattle, arms dealer, information broker, and the only man who'd ever successfully infiltrated Charlie's network. The conversation was shorter, conducted in the coded language of their shared profession. "Charlie's active again. Small-town operation, personal vendetta. I need his supply lines, his contacts, anyone he might run to when things go sideways. That'll cost you. Charlie's connected now. Foreign money, serious backing. This isn't the freelance psycho you remember. Bill me later. And Tommy? This one's time-sensitive. When are they not? With you." Tommy's fingers were already working keyboards in the background. 12 hours for preliminary intel, 24 for the full package. Try not to start shooting until I send the files. Marcus ended the call and looked at Emma, still absorbed in her drawing. She'd added a second butterfly, smaller, following the first one's flight path. "Are those us?" he asked. "That's me," she said, pointing to the smaller butterfly. "And that's you. You're bigger, so you can protect me from bad things." The simple logic of childhood wrapped around profound truth. Marcus had spent 15 years trying to be something he wasn't. Tonight, Emma had shown him a different path. Not redemption through denial, but integration through acceptance. He was Steele. He was Marcus. He was her father. And Charlie Morrison was about to learn the difference between a retired operator and a father with nothing left to lose. The encrypted phone buzzed at 4:47 a.m. with Tommy's preliminary intelligence package. Marcus had been awake for 3 hours, sitting in the corner chair of their motel room while Emma slept fitfully in the double bed, her purple jacket folded carefully on the nightstand like a talisman against the darkness they'd fled. The data painted a picture that made Marcus's blood run cold. Charlie Morrison wasn't working alone. He was the tip of a spear forged by Dmitry Volkov, a Russian arms dealer who'd been hunting the encrypted drive for over a decade. The drive contained more than state secrets. It held the complete financial records of Operation Nightfall, a joint CIA-Russian intelligence operation that had gone sideways in spectacular fashion, leaving both governments eager to bury the evidence and eliminate anyone who could expose their collaboration. Marcus scrolled through facial recognition photos of Charlie's support team. 6 operators, all ex-military, all with records of wet work across 3 continents. They'd been in Cedar Falls for 2 weeks, establishing positions, mapping escape routes, turning his quiet mountain town into a killing ground. But the final piece of intelligence hit him like a physical blow. Sarah's accident hadn't been an accident at all. The brake line failure, the icy mountain road, the convenient lack of witnesses, it had all been Charlie's handiwork, designed to flush Marcus out of hiding. His wife had died because someone wanted leverage against a ghost who'd been living as a small-town mechanic. Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring words he couldn't catch, and Marcus felt something cold and implacable settle into his bones. For 15 years he'd carried guilt over Sarah's death, believing his past had somehow cursed their happiness. Now he knew the truth. His past had literally killed her, and he'd been too buried in domestic fantasy to see the threat until it came for his daughter. The motel room door opened without sound, a skill he'd never lost, as Sophia Reyes stepped inside with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent 20 years moving through hostile territory. She'd aged well. The silver threading through her black hair only made her dark eyes more striking, and the tactical gear beneath her civilian jacket spoke to muscles that hadn't forgotten their purpose. Your daughter's beautiful, Sophia whispered, settling into the chair beside him. She looks like Sarah. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. Sophia had been at their wedding, had stood as Emma's godmother in a brief ceremony before disappearing back into the shadow world they'd all called home. Tell me about Charlie's team, he said quietly. Sophia pulled out a tablet, swiping through surveillance photos taken in the past 6 hours. 4 in town, 2 more in the mountains. They've turned the elementary school into a fortress, tripwires, surveillance equipment, enough firepower to hold off a SWAT team. Charlie's banking on you coming to him. He knows me too well. Marcus studied the tactical layout, his mind automatically calculating angles of attack, probable casualties, acceptable losses. The old skills flowed back like muscle memory, and he felt Emma's small hand slip into his without her waking up. Even in sleep, she somehow knew when he needed anchoring. There's something else, Sophia said, her voice carefully neutral. Volkov put a bounty on Emma. 5 million for her delivery, alive and unharmed. He wants to use her as permanent leverage against you. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus looked at his daughter, 8 years old, autistic, innocent of everything except the crime of having Steele's blood in her veins, and felt the last restraints on his humanity begin to snap. How many of them have children? He asked. Sophia checked her files. 3. Why? Because they need to understand what they're fighting for. Marcus stood carefully, extracting his hand from Emma's grip and pulling the blanket up to her chin. I want you to make some calls. Tell their families to disappear for the next 40 to 8 hours. Hotel, relatives, anywhere that's not home. Understanding dawned in Sophia's eyes. Marcus, you can't? I'm not threatening their children, he said quietly. I'm protecting them from what I become if Charlie forces my hand. This ends at the school, Sophia, tonight. But it ends with everyone understanding the difference between a job and a war. Emma's eyes opened, green and alert despite the early hour. Daddy? Are you going away? Marcus knelt beside the bed, brushing hair from her forehead with the same gentle touch he'd used for bedtime stories and scraped knees. But when he spoke, it was with the absolute certainty of someone who'd commanded death squads across 4 continents. Just for a little while, Butterfly. Daddy has to make sure the bad people can't hurt you anymore. She studied his face with the intense focus autism afforded her, reading micro-expressions and vocal patterns that revealed more than words ever could. You're going to be scary, Marcus, now. Yes. Will you come back as nice Marcus? The question pierced him more cleanly than any bullet. I don't know, Emma, but I'll always come back to you. She reached up and touched his cheek with her small hand. I'll remember nice Marcus for you, so you don't forget. The simple faith in her voice nearly broke him. Marcus kissed her forehead, memorizing the moment. The weight of her trust, the clean smell of her hair, the purple butterfly nightgown that made her look impossibly young and vulnerable. Stay with Sophia, he whispered. She'll keep you safe. Then he stood and walked out of the motel room, leaving behind 15 years of carefully constructed peace and stepping back into the darkness he'd never truly escaped. Riverside Elementary at 3 a.m. looked like a tomb carved from brick and shadow. Marcus crouched in the tree line, studying the building through night vision scope, cataloging the modifications Charlie's team had made. Motion sensors at the corners, infrared cameras sweeping predetermined patterns, razor wire concealed in the playground equipment, where children would swing and laugh in just 5 hours. The irony wasn't lost on him. The place where Emma had suffered her first taste of cruelty had been transformed into a fortress designed to deliver her final one. Sophia's voice crackled through his earpiece. 2 sentries on the roof, 1 in the main hallway, 3 more distributed throughout the building. Charlie's in the principal's office. Poetic, considering. Explosives. C-4. At all entrances, dead man switches on the sentries. If their heart rate drops below 40 BPM for more than 30 seconds, the whole place becomes a crater. Marcus smiled without humor. Charlie had learned new tricks in 15 years, but he'd also grown predictable. The elaborate setup wasn't tactical, it was theater. designed to force Steele into a direct confrontation where Charlie held all the advantages, or thought he did. Sophia, I need you to call the fire department. Anonymous tip about a gas leak at the school. Get them here in 20 minutes with full evacuation protocols. Marcus, if you're planning what I think, Charlie wants Steele. He's about to get more than he bargained for. Marcus moved through the darkness with fluid precision, muscle memory overriding 15 years of civilian softness. His hands found purchase on storm drains and window ledges, carrying him up the building's exterior like a wraith ascending. The roof sentries never saw him coming. 2 precise pressure points, and they dropped unconscious, their heart rates maintained at safe levels by carefully calculated nerve compression. The skylight above the gymnasium gave him access to the building's interior. Marcus dropped silently into the darkened space where Emma had probably played dodgeball and suffered through physical education, her autism making team sports a special kind of torment. Everything came back to his daughter. Every step through these halls, every tactical decision, every life he was about to take, it all connected to a purple-jacketed 8-year-old who saw the world in absolutes but somehow understood that her father contained multitudes. Charlie's voice echoed through the school's PA system, theatrical and confident. I know you're here, Steele. Impressive entry, but you're still trapped in a building wired to explode. How does it feel, knowing your daughter will watch her daddy die on the evening news? Marcus keyed his throat mic. How does it feel knowing you killed Sarah for nothing? Silence stretched across the connection. Then Charlie's laughter, bitter and unhinged. Oh, Steele, you still don't understand, do you? Sarah wasn't collateral damage. She was the whole point. The words hit Marcus like physical blows, but he kept moving through the school's corridors, past classrooms where Emma struggled with social interactions and hallways where she'd been pushed and tormented. Volkov didn't want the drive, Charlie continued. He wanted you. Sarah's death was supposed to break you, make you reckless. When that failed, when you just disappeared deeper into suburban fantasy, we had to get creative. Amazing how easily children can be turned into weapons, isn't it? A few words to the right kids, some encouragement from teachers who could be bought or threatened. Your precious Emma became the perfect bait. Marcus found himself outside the principal's office, the same door where he'd sat 2 weeks ago, trying to protect his daughter through official channels, believing civilization could shield them from the darkness. He'd been naive then. The darkness had already been inside the building, wearing suits and carrying lesson plans, turning childhood cruelty into precisely orchestrated psychological warfare. The best part? Charlie's voice carried genuine glee now. She'll never escape it. Every school, every town you run to, will be there, making her life hell, using her autism against her, until you finally break and come back to the family business where you belong. Marcus felt something fundamental tear inside his chest. Not just anger, that was too small a word. This was the complete dissolution of every restraint he'd built over 15 years of trying to be worthy of his daughter's love. He kicked open the door to the principal's office, and Charlie Morrison turned from the window with a smile that died the instant he saw Marcus's face. Hello, Charlie, Marcus said quietly. Let's discuss Emma's education. Charlie Morrison had aged poorly. The lean muscle Marcus remembered from Prague had turned to soft flesh, and the predatory confidence had curdled into something desperate and mean. He stood behind Principal Carter's desk like a grotesque parody of educational authority, his finger hovering over a dead man's switch that would turn the school into a crater. Steele, Charlie said, his voice carrying forced calm. You look good. Suburban life agrees with you. Marcus stepped into the office, hands visible but relaxed. Every instinct screamed danger. Charlie's positioning, the explosive vest barely concealed beneath his jacket, the laptop displaying Emma's location blinking on the motel room feed. His daughter's sleeping face filled the screen, Sophia's silhouette visible in the corner chair. You made a mistake, Charlie. Only one? Charlie's laugh held hysteria at the edges. I'd say my mistake was not killing you in Yemen when I had the chance. Your mistake, Marcus continued, moving another step closer, was thinking this was about me. Charlie's finger twitched on the switch. "Everything's about you, Steele. Always has been. The great Marcus Donovan, too pure for wet work, too noble for the necessary evils. You waltzed out of the life like it was a job you could quit, like the blood would just wash off with enough domestic bliss. Sarah wasn't part of this. Sarah was naive. She actually believed you could change, that love could scrub away 15 years of killing." Charlie's eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction, right up until her brakes failed on that mountain road. "Did you know she called your name right before impact? The investigators found it on her cell phone voicemail. She was trying to call you, probably to say she loved you one last time." The revelation hit Marcus like a sledgehammer, but he didn't flinch. Couldn't flinch. Not with Emma's life hanging in the balance and Charlie's finger on a switch that would end dozens of innocent lives. "And Emma?" Marcus asked quietly. "Emma was supposed to be leverage. Proof that you could never really escape, that everyone you touched would suffer until you came home to Papa Volkov." Charlie glanced at the laptop screen. Beautiful child. Shame about the autism makes her so vulnerable to psychological pressure. Amazing what sustained bullying can do to a developing mind. Marcus felt the familiar cold settle into his bones, the absolute calm that had made him legendary in the shadow world. But underneath it, something new burned. Not just the professional detachment of Steele, but the protective fury of a father whose child had been systematically tortured. "You want to know the real beauty of it?" Charlie leaned forward, drunk on his own cleverness. "Even if you kill me, even if you somehow survive this, she'll never be safe. Volkov has patience. He'll wait, watch, strike when you least expect it. Every birthday party, every school play, every moment of happiness, tainted by the knowledge that we're out there, waiting." "You're wrong about one thing," Marcus said. "What's that? You think I'm here to negotiate?" Marcus moved with liquid precision, 15 years of muscle memory overriding conscious thought. His left hand swept Charlie's wrist away from the dead man's switch while his right delivered a precise strike to the carotid artery. Charlie dropped, unconscious but alive, the switch clattering harmlessly to the floor. But Marcus didn't stop there. He knelt beside Charlie's still form and began speaking, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of judgment. "When you wake up, you're going to call Volkov. You're going to tell him that Marcus Donovan is dead, burned alive in a school fire with his daughter. You're going to provide dental records, DNA evidence, whatever he needs to believe it completely." Charlie's eyes fluttered open, consciousness returning with the clarity of terror. "You're going to do this," Marcus continued, "because if Dmitry Volkov ever learns that Emma Donovan is alive, if he ever comes within 1,000 miles of my daughter, I will hunt down everyone he's ever loved and make them pay for his mistake. I will become the monster you always said I was, Charlie, and you know I have the skills to follow through." Charlie tried to speak, but Marcus pressed his thumb against the pressure point again, sending him back into darkness. Then Marcus stood and walked to the laptop, looking one last time at his daughter's sleeping face. Emma shifted in her sleep, clutching the purple jacket to her chest, and Marcus felt his heart break and harden simultaneously. He pulled out his encrypted phone and dialed Sophia's number. "It's done," he said when she answered. "But there's one more thing I need you to do. Name it." Marcus looked around the principal's office, the place where his daughter had been failed by every adult who should have protected her, and made the hardest decision of his life. "I need you to disappear with Emma. New identities, new lives, somewhere Charlie and Volkov can never find you. Marcus? Steele has to die tonight, Sophia, completely. It's the only way she'll ever be safe." The silence stretched between them, heavy with understanding. "And Marcus Donovan?" He closed his eyes, seeing Emma's face one last time. "He dies too." Sophia's voice cracked through the encrypted line. "There has to be another way." Marcus stared at the laptop screen where Emma slept peacefully, unaware that her father was orchestrating his own death to secure her future. "We both know there isn't. Volkov doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive. The only way Emma lives a normal life is if everyone who wants to hurt her believes she's already dead. Marcus, she's going to grow up thinking you abandoned her." The words cut deeper than any blade he'd ever taken. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering Emma's small hand in his, her promise to remember nice Marcus so he wouldn't forget himself. She'd been trying to save him even then, and he hadn't understood. Tell her I had to go away to keep her safe, that I loved her more than anything in the world. His voice nearly broke. And Sophia? Make sure she knows none of this was her fault. The bullying, my leaving, none of it. Through the office window, Marcus could see fire trucks arriving in response to Sophia's earlier call. Red lights painted the school's facade in hellish hues, and he knew the symbolism would play perfectly in tomorrow's news reports. Steele burned to death trying to save his daughter from a gas explosion. Tragic end to a domestic terrorist rampage. What about Charlie? Marcus looked down at the unconscious man who had orchestrated 15 years of grief. Charlie's going to help us sell the story. He'll wake up believing he killed us both, and his own guilt will make the performance convincing. And the other team members? They'll scatter once they think the job is done. Without Volkov's money keeping them together, they'll disappear back into whatever holes they crawled out of. Marcus began typing commands into Charlie's laptop, uploading fabricated DNA records and dental charts into the system. The beauty of our old life, Sophia. Everyone's so paranoid they'll believe the evidence without question. The fire department's voices echoed through the school's halls as they began their evacuation sweep. Marcus had maybe 10 minutes before they reached the administrative wing. I've prepared everything you'll need, he continued, fingers flying across the keyboard. Bank accounts in Zurich, documentation for a mother and daughter from Saskatchewan relocating to Portland. Emma Reyes, 8 years old, high-functioning autism, loves butterflies and purple things. Emma Reyes, Sophia repeated softly. She gets to keep her name. Parts of it. I couldn't take everything away from her. Marcus uploaded the final files and began the building's gas leak simulation, a slow release that would create the perfect cover story for the explosion Charlie's team had wired. There's a house in the Laurelhurst neighborhood, good school district, autism support programs. I've been Emma's absent father for the past 6 months, killed in a motorcycle accident last week. You're her stepmother taking custody. You've thought of everything. I had to. She's all that matters now. Through his earpiece, Marcus could hear Emma stirring in the motel room, probably sensing Sophia's tension even in sleep. His daughter's supernatural ability to read emotions would serve her well in her new life, assuming Sophia could help her heal from the trauma she'd already endured. Marcus. Sophia's voice carried a weight that spoke to 20 years of shared history. What you're doing, this sacrifice, it's the bravest thing I've ever seen. It's not brave, Marcus replied, beginning to strip Charlie's explosive vest. It's just what fathers do. We protect our children, even from ourselves. He activated the building's fire suppression system, creating enough chaos to mask his movements as he prepared for the final act. The gas leak would provide cover for a small explosion, enough to destroy Charlie's surveillance equipment and create the DNA evidence that would convince Volkov his nemesis was truly dead. Tell me about her new school, Marcus said, needing something positive to focus on as he made his final preparations. Laurelhurst Elementary. Small class sizes, dedicated special needs support, zero tolerance for bullying. The principal, Mrs. Chen, has an autistic son. She'll understand Emma's needs. Marcus nodded, picturing his daughter thriving in an environment designed for children like her. No more torture disguised as socialization. No more teachers who looked the other way while his butterfly suffered in silence. And if she asks about her father, I'll tell her you were a good man who loved her very much, that you worked very dangerous jobs to keep people safe, and that sometimes heroes don't get happy endings. The fire department's voices grew closer. Marcus could hear Charlie stirring, consciousness returning with drug-addled confusion that would only add to the performance. It's time, Marcus said quietly. I know, Sophia's voice carried tears she was too professional to shed. Marcus, thank you for trusting me with her. Take care of my butterfly, Sophia. Help her remember that the world has beauty in it. I promise. Marcus ended the call and looked one last time at his daughter's sleeping face on the laptop screen. Then he closed it gently and walked toward his carefully orchestrated death, carrying with him the absolute certainty that Emma would finally, truly be safe. Marcus watched the flames consume the school's administrative wing from his position in the tree line, the heat washing over his face like a final benediction. The explosion had been perfect, controlled, devastating, leaving just enough forensic evidence to convince anyone investigating that Marcus Steele Donovan and his daughter had perished in the blaze. Charlie's unconscious form had been found by firefighters, his confused testimony about a gas leak and tragic accident already spreading through law enforcement channels. By morning, the story would be carved in stone. Domestic terrorist dies attempting to rescue his autistic daughter from his own bomb. Case closed, file sealed, threat eliminated. Marcus turned away from the pyre of his old life and disappeared into the Montana wilderness. 6 months later, Marcus stood outside Laurelhurst Elementary in Portland, watching children stream through the gates with the chaotic energy of dismissal time. His beard had grown thick and gray, his hair longer than he'd worn it since his army days. Wire-rimmed glasses and a slight stoop completed the transformation. He looked like exactly what his new identity claimed, David Chen, a widowed university librarian who'd moved to Portland for a fresh start. Then he saw her. Emma walked hand in hand with Sophia, now Elena Reyes, her purple backpack bouncing as she navigated the crowded sidewalk. She'd grown taller, her face fuller, but what stopped Marcus's breath was her expression. She was smiling. Not the careful, guarded smile he remembered from Cedar Falls, but something genuine and unafraid. "Mama Elena," Emma said, her voice carrying clearly across the street. "Can we feed the ducks at the park? Mrs. Chen says they're preparing for winter migration and need extra nutrition." Sophia laughed, the sound carrying maternal warmth that made Marcus's chest tight. "Of course, butterfly. But homework first when we get home. Always homework first," Emma agreed solemnly. "Structure creates safety." They walked past Marcus without recognition, Emma chattering about her day with an openness he'd never heard before. No mention of bullies, no flinching at loud noises, no desperate clinging to his hand. She moved through the world like any other 8-year-old, protected by anonymity and Sophia's fierce devotion. Marcus followed at a distance, a ghost haunting the edges of his daughter's new life. At the park, he watched Emma feed ducks while Sophia graded papers on a nearby bench. His daughter had developed theories about duck behavior, organizing bread pieces by size and distributing them according to some complex algorithm only she understood. The other children found her quirks endearing rather than threatening, a miracle of proper environment and adult protection. "The mallards are establishing dominance hierarchies," Emma explained to a boy her age who'd approached her duck feeding station. "But if we provide sufficient resources, we can minimize territorial conflict." The boy nodded seriously. "You know a lot about ducks." "I know a lot about lots of things," Emma replied, matter-of-factly. "My daddy taught me that knowledge is power, but kindness is strength." Marcus gripped the park bench until his knuckles went white. His words, distilled through a child's understanding and somehow perfected in the translation. That evening, Marcus sat in his studio apartment, spare, functional, deliberately temporary, and video-called the encrypted number Sophia had provided for emergencies. Her face appeared on screen, older than he remembered, but carrying a contentment he'd never seen during their operational years. "You were at the school today." It wasn't a question. Sophia had always been impossibly observant. "I know I shouldn't." "She's thriving, Marcus. Beyond anything I hoped for when we started this." Sophia's voice carried gentle firmness. "But you can't keep doing this. It's not fair to any of us. I just needed to see that she's happy, she is, that she's safe, completely, that she's forgotten you." Sophia paused. "Never." The word hit like a physical blow. "She asks about you," Sophia continued. "Not obsessively, but regularly. She's constructed elaborate theories about your work, your disappearance, your reasons for leaving. None of them involve abandonment, Marcus. She's decided you're protecting people who can't protect themselves, and that's why you can't come home yet." Marcus closed his eyes. She's 8 years old. She's brilliant. And she understands love better than most adults. Sophia leaned closer to the camera. But Marcus, you have to choose. Either trust me completely with her future or find a way to be part of it. This halfway existence is destroying you, and eventually it'll endanger her. Marcus knew she was right. He'd been telling himself these surveillance runs were about security, ensuring Emma's safety. But the truth was simpler and more selfish. He couldn't let go. What do you recommend? Sophia smiled, and for a moment she looked like the young operative he'd trusted with impossible missions. Come home, Marcus. Not as Steele, not as the ghost you've become, but as David Chen. Be her neighbor, her friend's father, the librarian who helps with research projects. Be someone she can know without knowing who you really are. And if she recognizes me, then we'll deal with it together. Like family should. Marcus stared at his daughter's artwork covering Sophia's refrigerator, visible in the background of the video call, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. Not the cold precision of Steele or the desperate protection of Marcus, but something entirely new. Tell me about David Chen, he said quietly. Sophia's smile widened. He's a good man who loves books and butterflies, and he just moved into the house 3 blocks away. 3 months later, Marcus, now fully inhabiting his life as David Chen, sat cross-legged on the library's story circle carpet, surrounded by a dozen children including his daughter. Emma perched at the edge of the group, her purple notebook open as she sketched the monarch butterfly life cycle he'd just finished explaining. Mr. Chen asked Tommy Rodriguez, the boy from the park, "How do butterflies know where to go when they migrate?" Marcus smiled, watching Emma's pencil pause as she waited for his answer. That's one of nature's greatest mysteries. Scientists think it's partly genetic memory, partly magnetic navigation, and partly something we don't understand yet. Emma's hand shot up. Is it like how some people just know things? Like knowing when someone loves you even if they can't say it? The question landed with surgical precision, and Marcus felt his carefully constructed composure waver. Emma's dark eyes met his across the circle, not with recognition exactly, but with something deeper. An 8-year-old's intuitive understanding that some truths lived beyond words. Yes, he managed. Exactly like that. After the session, as parents collected their children, Sophia lingered near the picture books with Emma, letting the crowd thin before approaching. Marcus busied himself reshelving materials, hyper-aware of his daughter's presence 3 feet away. Mr. Chen? Emma's voice carried the careful politeness she used with adults she was still evaluating. Do you have any books about fathers who have to go away? Sophia tensed, but Marcus knelt to Emma's eye level, trusting instincts honed by 15 years of loving this extraordinary child. What kind of going away? He asked gently. The important kind. Where they love you but they can't stay because staying would be dangerous. Emma clutched her butterfly notebook against her chest. Not the leaving because you're bad kind, the other kind. Marcus's throat constricted. Let me think about that. There might be some stories that would help. Emma nodded gravely. Thank you. I'm writing a story about a butterfly whose daddy becomes a bird so he can watch over her from far away. But I want to make sure I get the science right. The science? About transformation. About how something can become completely different but still be the same inside. She tilted her head, studying his face with uncomfortable intensity. You have kind eyes, Mr. Chen, like someone who understands about protecting things that are fragile. Before Marcus could respond, Emma had rejoined Sophia, chattering about homework and duck pond visits. But as they reached the library's exit, she turned back. Mr. Chen? I think butterflies remember being caterpillars, even after they change. Do you think that's possible? Marcus watched his daughter disappear into the Portland afternoon, her question hanging in the air like incense. Sophia's backward glance carried approval and warning in equal measure. This is working, but carefully, always carefully. That evening, Marcus sat in his small garden, tending the butterfly plants he'd cultivated since moving to the neighborhood. Monarchs danced between the milkweed and asters, preparing for their southern journey, and he found peace in their ancient rhythm of transformation and return. His phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. She asked me tonight if angels could be librarians. I told her anything was possible. Marcus smiled, typing back. What did she say to that? That she hopes her daddy angel likes books as much as she does. The words blurred as Marcus set down his phone. In the growing darkness, he could see lights in windows throughout the neighborhood, families gathering for dinner, children being tucked into bed, the ordinary miracles he'd spent years protecting from the shadows. Emma's bedroom window glowed warm yellow 3 blocks away. Sophia would be reading her a bedtime story, probably something about butterflies or brave children who saved their families through cleverness and love. His daughter would fall asleep surrounded by beauty and safety, her dreams unmarred by the violence that had shaped her first 8 years. Tomorrow, Marcus would return to the library, to story circles and gentle questions about transformation. He would tend his garden and feed ducks and exist at the careful periphery of Emma's world, close enough to love her, distant enough to keep her safe. Steele was dead, burned away in a Montana school. Marcus Donovan was a ghost, mourned by no one who mattered. But David Chen was a man who understood that sometimes the greatest act of love was learning to love differently. A monarch landed on his outstretched hand, wings pulsing with ancient purpose. Marcus watched it test the air currents, preparing for a journey programmed into its very DNA, proof that transformation wasn't death but evolution, that endings could become beginnings if you had the courage to let them. Safe travels, he whispered, and released it into the gathering night. In the distance, Emma's light went out. Marcus closed his eyes and finally, truly, came home.